Hello, Danusia here. Today I bring you a thought-provoking conversation with disability advocate and author of Sitting Pretty, the view from my ordinary, resilient, disabled body, Rebekah Taussig. She challenges stereotypes and invites us to see beyond the surface of disability. In this mini-episode, Rebekah shares her personal journey of embracing her own disabled body and advocating for a more nuanced and inclusive understanding of disability. Let's get straight to it. What's the nub of what you really want people to know about the view that you have from your ordinary, resilient, disabled body? What is it you're not seeing and hearing that just has to be out there?
Thank you for asking that question. But I think the first one that kind of comes to the forefront for me is this kind of one-dimensionality or oversimplification that I feel like I grew up in a world where disability was represented as so flat, as so like you have two options. You're disabled and you can be miserable and sad and everyone can feel sorry for you, or you can be like this overwhelming positivity that inspires everyone and everyone. And so growing up, I really leaned into that version, which really only allowed me to live in this very tiny box. And of course, nobody is that way. Nobody is that way all the time. Kind of forcing myself to fit into that really tiny role was pretty damaging for me as I blossomed into a person. And it took a lot of work to let myself kind of expand beyond that. When I think about what I want people to see or come to understand, like one simple and sort of revelatory idea might be that the experience of disability is just as complicated and nuanced and rewarding and devastating as any life in any body. I think because we have such few and extreme stories and versions of what disability can look like, we tend to come to the world, and when we see actual living disabled people, we have this sort of automatic assumption about what their life is because we only have so many versions that we've seen represented for us. And I think if there was one thing I would hope that would change is that when you're out in the world and you do encounter, or in your own families or wherever, disabled people are everywhere, wherever you encounter that, just recognize coming to that with as much open-handedness as you would any human, with no assumptions about what that means for a person or what their lives are like or what they're capable of. You don't know. There's just as much nuance and complication with a disabled life as there is with a non-disabled life. But we don't tend to let those narratives open and breathe as much, I don't think, at least in my experience. And what comes with that is just recognizing that I think the second wave of that would be right now, I think in the narratives that we have, we keep disabled people kind of distant. And we tend to think that, I say we as if I'm like on one side of this narrative or the other. But I think that people tend to see disabled people as the recipients of help, the people that we can be kind to and lift up, as opposed to kind of participating in a two-way relationship where disabled people have really valuable things to offer their communities, and not just as sources of inspiration for their non-disabled peers, but have skills and insights and personalities and humor and wisdom and all of that to bring to their communities.
What I hear Rebekah calling for is what she calls open-handedness, being met with no assumptions about what they or their life is like. The disabled people deserve what I'd say is open-heartedness and human decency.
I think my second wish or hope or dream would be that as people think through these ideas that they would recognize or think, I would really like to have a disabled person on my team. That's a perspective that I would like to bring into my team. So those are some of the things that I think I would hope people would see or understand the richness and complication of a disabled life.
Underneath it all, it sounds like you're saying, excuse the dreadful paraphrasing, and I know you'll tell me if it's wrong. For God's sake, stop capping our potential. Stop treating us like we're not human beings with potential.
Yeah.
Cut with the patronizing. Not here to be this source of happy little inspiration to make you all feel, like pep you up. Actually, I'm wondering if really some of this is like, we're human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that part of that narrative, I think there's a lot of fear wrapped up in disability. And one of the things that's interesting about the experience of being disabled is that ultimately, and this is a really horrifying thing for people to hear sometimes, but ultimately, like, if we live long enough, this is an experience that most of us will at some point enter into, at least temporarily, that we will kind of be disabled in some way. The aging body ultimately kind of moves in this direction. And I think that whether or not people are articulating that to themselves or not, that there's a fear there of what that would mean, and a lot of attempts to distance ourselves and keep ourselves from that. Understandably, I think that as our bodies change, that is a really scary thing. But I think that some of that recognition can change the way that we see the disabled people in our lives on a day-to-day basis. Or conversely, sometimes we have already experienced a temporary, what we could call disabling experience, like breaking your leg, for example. I've had a lot of conversations with people where they will say something like, "Oh yeah, I was in a wheelchair for 6 months. That was the worst." Like the experience of it is so small. It's so small, and like breaking your leg for 6 months is not the same thing. You just cannot experience the world in the same way as someone who has a disability, right? So there's this way that we're like, every human person is close enough to disability that there's this set of feelings and assumptions. But also, if you haven't actually experienced it and you don't know that lived life yet, it's bound to be oversimplified. I think there's something about that relationship, the potential closeness of disability to any given human person, that does really warp the perception of that experience in a way that seems to really oversimplify and distance the experience. That's my theory.
I wanted to know about Rebekah's pregnancy. How was pregnancy? Give us a flavor.
I've met so many women who love being pregnant, and I wondered what it would be like for me, and I did not love it. I would like turn to my partner Micah, and I was like, I think there's been a big mistake. Like, I don't think that this is supposed to happen to a human body. Like, what is going on? My favorite part, though, like the one thing that actually I wonder if like was worth the experience of the 9 months, was I loved feeling my baby kick and move and turn. He moved a lot. Well, it took me a while to feel him, and I didn't know what that would be like for me because I do have paralysis. I was really scared initially, because they always say you should feel your baby at these weeks, and I was not feeling him. But when I did start to feel him, he moved constantly, and I felt so much comfort moment by moment. Like every hour, I would feel my baby. And it just felt like little Morse code messages, like, we're okay. We're okay, with his kicks against my belly. And that was a precious thing to me. Everything else, I was like, this sucks. So he came early, and he was planned because of a couple of things, complications with spinal cord injury and delivery. And my liver started having some hard times towards the end. So they wanted to get him out. So he came at 37 weeks and was just so hilarious, perplexing, amazing little person from the get-go. He was pretty small because he was early, and then he almost doubled in size in the first month of his life.
Yeah.
Really made up for the lost time. And growing up, I didn't really know how to picture myself being pregnant or as a mother. I just hadn't seen very many women like me do that.
Because, as Rebekah says in her book, she only saw disability depicted as something monstrous, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, inspirational, Helen Keller, or angelic, Forrest Gump. None of this felt right, and as she got older, she longed for more stories that allowed disability to be complex and ordinary, uncomfortable and fine, painful and fulfilling. And that, of course, includes pregnancy and motherhood. Thank you for coming on the show today, Rebekah. I loved moving beyond the simplification of disability as a flat, one-size-fits-all experience to something so much more.
It has been lovely for me. I've really loved talking with you. And I love what you're doing with your podcast, like the intentionality that you have behind who you're reaching out to and the stories that you're highlighting and who you're bringing into the fold and what you're exploring. I just love what you're doing. And your questions, like I just love the tenderness and thoughtfulness of the questions that you brought into our conversation today. I loved chatting with you.
I hope you've enjoyed this mini convo today. Buy Rebekah's book. You really won't regret it. Until next week, keep thinking and loving. Take care, everyone.